Stories hook the prospect, the buyer.
Selling is a deeper emotional relationship, a deeper emotional connection.
That prospect or buyer is inserting themselves in that story.
The art of selling is getting the buyer to give you that message. So tell me how 25% more sales, what that does to your business.
Damn, that's expensive.
Oh, that's a lot of money. The prospect is believing a fiction.
Always, always, always believe the story that they tell themselves.
And then the best way of all is getting the prospect to tell me a story. The hero of the story is always the buyer.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Unscripted Selling. I'm Sophia alongside Carlos, and today's episode is all about the power of storytelling in sales. I'm sure you've heard at some point, if you're telling, you're not selling unless you're storytelling. So if you're here, you're meant to be here, so keep listening. And don't forget to hit subscribe and like on the episode. So let's talk about what is storytelling and why is it so crucial in sales. Now, a lot of the times we feel when we're in front of a prospect that we have to convince and persuade our prospect, cajole, massage.
We don't people don't use the word cajole enough. What a great word cajole is.
Can you give me a definition of cajole?
Wow. So I'm going to, it's synonymous in my mind with persuade, arm twist. So I can give you synonyms for it. There will be a kind of a knife edge difference between persuade and cajole. Cajole it's got a connotation in my mind that it's against somebody's will, whereas persuade is kind of working with a neutral. Is with somebody who's neutral, and that's how it is in my mind. It's got that. It's kind of a force. Mm-hmm. Cajole makes me think you're forcing somebody to do something, maybe a little bit manipulative. But anyways, storytelling.
Storytelling. So stories hook the prospect, the buyer, your current client that you're trying to expand right from the start. So today we're going to talk about how to use stories, whether it be for an objection or a stall, like, damn, that's expensive. We're going to talk about how we use stories to inspire action. And then we're also going to talk about how to engage and present through storytelling. So Carlos, why don't you tell us about the psychology of storytelling?
Do you know, I will do, but you said something earlier a moment ago. You said it's the power of storytelling. I think it's in selling. It's a superpower. Absolute superpower storytelling. And what is it that there's a famous radio journalist, Ira Glass, who said great things happen to great storytellers, or great things happen to people who tell great stories. I butchered the quote, but it's a superpower, and I think one of the reasons it's such a great superpower in its ability to inspire, to help somebody, is just because if you read, have you ever read *Sapiens*? And listeners, if you've never read *Sapiens*, do yourself a favor. It was Namer that got me to read *Sapiens*. And if you're listening to it, I know you're a fan of the show, Namer. So thank you, Namer, for that. Namer Samnami. But if you read *Sapiens*, he talks in that book about the cognitive revolution, about the fact that human beings are the only animals that have got the ability to believe fictions. Right, that's in the heart of our evolution as a species. The fact that I can say to you, Sophia, "Hey, Sophia, careful if you go into that next valley because there's a lion over there," and without having to actually see and experience the lion yourself, you can pull these things together and believe in something that you've not seen and experienced, because that's a fiction, right? To you, me telling you, hey, don't go into the next valley, there's a lion, creates a fiction in your mind. And that fiction, you can believe. Mm-hmm. You can believe it. That's the power of that's why human beings are different.
You know what's so interesting, Carlos? As you're sharing that with me, obviously, listeners, you've probably heard in some of our previous episodes that on the weekends I like to do improv, and one of the rules in improv is don't make the scene about a thing. Anytime a scene gets too focused on a barbecue, let's say the barbecue is setting fire. Yes, it's about the fire, but what really connects people to the characters is the relationship that they have. And I think that's another part of storytelling, is that as you're telling a story of a previous buyer, or if you're telling a story in a negotiation conversation, that prospect or buyer is inserting themselves in that story. In tribes, our ancestors sat around a campfire and told stories, and we identified with the characters in the stories. I mean, it's the reason why we watch any show, even an action movie. Yes, there's all these special effects and explosions and guns and all these exciting things, but we really, what keeps us engaged is the relationship between the people. And so as we're using storytelling in sales, we want to tell stories that allow our prospects and buyers to insert themselves in that story and identify with that story.
So is one of the things that we're postulating today, that we are that we're asserting today, Sophia, that that selling is a deeper emotional relationship, a deeper emotional connection than just showing up and telling somebody why you're groovy, why you're great. Yeah?
Absolutely.
What's the golden rules? Tell our listeners the golden rules of selling, the 4 golden rules.
Okay. So if you're driving, pull over at the Dunkin' Donuts, take out a notepad, write this down somewhere. Okay. Here is the golden rule of selling. Okay. As salespeople, our prospects never believe what you tell them. Okay. They never believe what you tell them, because of course you would tell me that. You're a salesperson. They rarely believe what you show them. A graphic of some kind, a brochure, a website, a statistic, some pie chart that lives somewhere. They rarely believe that, because of course you're going to show me that. You're a salesperson. You're trying to put your hands in my pocket, right? They sometimes believe what others tell them, third-party story, reviews. We live in the age of reviews. So they sometimes believe what someone else tells them. But they always, always, always believe the story that they tell themselves. If their ears are hearing their mouth tell the story, if their ears are hearing their mouth tell those facts, then it is facts, and they believe it.
You know, it's amazing. I always tell clients that the science of selling is knowing what message to give at what time to what buyer. But the art of selling is getting the buyer to give you that message, right? So that you want the buyer to tell you what you're desperate to tell the buyer. Example, buyer might say, buyer might ask us a question. Buyer might say something like, oh, you know, that's a lot of money. And we're desperate to say, yeah, but it's worth it. Oh, it's worth every penny. But instead of saying that, if we then said, do you know what, George? You're not the first person to tell me that. Why do you think my customers choose what is more often than not the most expensive option? And then George says, probably really important that they get the impact, they get the outcome. Look what happened. Rather than me say it's important, buyer said it's important. Maybe the buyer says, well, maybe it's because you're the best. Rather than me say we're the best, buyer says we're the best. So that's the art of selling, is getting the buyer to tell me a story as a salesperson, but in effect, what they're really doing is they're telling themselves a story. It's the story they're telling themselves. Let me illustrate those 4 golden rules for our listeners. I want you to imagine for a moment, CEO of a, I don't know, plumbing supplies company. Plumbing supply company says to me, "Hey, Carlos, why should we use you for our sales training?" Let's imagine. Now, I could tell him why. Remember, they never believe what you tell them. I could say, "Well, George,
Well, here we
you've
go.
no idea how wonderful we are. We are amazing at training plumbing supplies company." He's not going to buy that. It's not going to wear it. Never going to believe what I tell him. Now, maybe I show him something. "George, look at our statistics. Look, we're the top. Look at this research that was done. We're the top training company for plumbing supply companies in the world." And I'll show him some data, and I'll show him some a chart and a graph. Rarely is that going to impress anybody. But they do sometimes believe what someone else tells them. And so there is a legitimate technique called a third-party story, where you kind of invite a fictional person into the conversation. So why should I use you, Carlos? And I might say, "George, not sure you should. All I can do is tell you what other companies like that look like you tell me. They tell me that we've had a 25% increase. We've driven a 25% increase in top line, high engagement. They say our training is very fun and engaging. I don't know if that's important to you." So I'm bringing through a third-party story technique. I'm telling a story, a fiction. It isn't fictional. Ideally, the best stories, have got a lot of truth in them. But I'm telling a story that might be entirely truthful to me, but the prospect is believing a fiction. Just like when I say to you, "Hey, Sophia, don't go into the next valley. There's a lion in there." You're believing what is essentially a fiction to you. Even though it might be the truth, there might be a lion over there. You're believing that fiction. And then the best way of all is getting the prospect to tell me a story. So, when he says, why should we use you, Carlos? I'm going to say, "George, I'm not even sure you should. I want you to sort of wave a magic wand over this for a moment and imagine the impact was fabulous. You tell me what impact that has on you. Tell me how that impacts the business. Tell me how 25% more sales, what that does to your business." And now he's going to start telling me a story. That's where it gets really powerful.
Isn't it incredible, Carlos, that people always believe their own data? People will always defend where they're at. It's like the buddy you have that's dating someone that's really toxic. And every time you try to tell him, "Man, I don't know about her," what do they do right away? What?
No, you don't know.
You don't know her that way.
Fabulous cook. She's a fabulous cook, right?
They dig their heels in.
Yeah, they do. But we can use this again. We use this in sales, especially when we challenge their data, right? So again, back in our world, talking to a CEO, say, "George, let's imagine your team made another, got more effective at prospecting and made another 25 dials a day, and at a good with a better, with a better impact, with a better skill set and a good attitude. Yeah, how many more accounts would that be a month for you?" And George does some mental arithmetic and says, that would be 15 new accounts a month, Carlos. And I'm going to say, "Nah, sounds like too much." And George is going to come right at me. No, he's going to prove it to me. 15. Right. Let me tell you why. Let me tell you how I've calculated that. And he's going to ferociously defend his number. It's very powerful.
That's what's up right there.
That's what's up. We're dropping gold. We're dropping gold here, Sophia. We're dropping gold on our listeners.
I'm wondering if the gold is worth a subscribe to our newsletter.
It's got to be, right?
It's got to be. And, if you want some more gold, there's more gold for the taking. Okay, we've got our AI event. When is that AI event, Carlos? We've got a ChatGPT webinar hosted by our very own unscripted selling host, Carlos Garrido.
Do you know, it's weird. It's weird since we had the brand name change, right?
I know. I get a little.
I get a little nostalgic and a little bit stuck. But we are now unscripted selling. It's like we are now the Snickers to the old marathon.
Even though we're teaching you a script today, not a script.
We're not. It isn't about a script.
Nope.
The script is unscripted because the script is going to trip you up. But a script and being practiced is different, right?
It's baked in. It's like
you said earlier about improv. Improv is inherently unscripted, but that doesn't mean it's unpracticed, right?
Hey, structure frees creativity.
There you go.
Structure frees creativity.
Mic drop. So, but AI, you're telling me, you're asking about my AI. Here's the challenge we've got. Even though for us, recording today, our AI presentation is next Tuesday, I don't think this is getting published before it. But
doesn't mean you can't watch. No,
but you can get a recording, right?
Email me, find me on LinkedIn, and I'll send you the recording.
And we'll send you the recording. We're doing a cool AI for salespeople 1 hour presentation next.
I think we gotta come out with some merch, Carlos. I think we're at the point where we gotta. We need a mouse pad.
We need a logo to have merch.
Is that usually how that works? That probably makes sense.
So. Otherwise, what are we going to put on the merch?
Just a picture. You guys don't want a picture.
Selling.
I think we should just send people a portrait in a nice frame of ourselves with no logo on it. Would that be weird?
Yeah. I need to send my wife a portrait of myself.
I think that'd be sweet. Okay, anyways, back to the elements of a good story.
Tell the team tell our listeners what the elements of a good story are.
Okay, so first we need a character, obviously, right? We need to have a relatable protagonist in the story. As I said earlier, that is the protagonist that the prospect, buyer, client is going to relate to. Okay, and it should be the buyer, not the salesperson.
The hero of the story
the hero
must be the buyer in the story.
Right.
If you're a salesperson out there trying to flex these muscles, I see this trap fall into all the time. We make our product or how smart we are or our company. We make the wrong character in the story. We make the hero. The hero of the story is always the buyer, such that the buyer in the setting of your sale is playing a movie where they're the hero. It has to be relatable. They have to insert themselves into that movie, and they're the hero of the story.
That's right. Once you have a character, we need conflict. So what were they struggling with? What were they frustrated, challenged by? Okay.
Crisis.
Crisis.
I actually believe it. I'm a very big believer in crisis. I don't know if you recall, but
That's what we need on the mouse pad. I'm a very big believer in crisis.
Crisis for selling. Crisis for selling.
Damn, that's what we should name the podcast.
One of my clients, Scott. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Scott. He introduced me to a really interesting fact, actually, that the chime in Mandarin, the two symbols that make up the word crisis are danger and opportunity. The pathos. You know what? I did some research. Scott, if you're listening, I actually did a little bit of research to see if that's right. And there's a bit of it's a bit of a point of conflict. There were some websites that told me that wasn't quite right. But it's beautiful that I'm going to believe it.
But don't let
the fiction. Yeah.
Don't let the truth get in the way of a good story.
How cool is that, though? It's danger and opportunity. So we create a crisis. And do you remember the call that you reviewed? One of my calls the other day. I sent you one about 2 weeks ago.
Yeah.
And I don't. You may or may not have noticed, but in preparing for this episode today, I was struck with a realization that quite unintentionally, I created quite a lot of crisis in that selling
meeting.
Event, right? In that meeting, we were talking about if this trend continues, what does that look like? And I really projected that trend forward for the guy, that it was not a pretty trend. and it created kind of a little sparkle of crisis, a little
cluster,
a little cluster of
little
crisis.
cluster F.
Yeah. But he's now a client, so something worked. Yeah.
Something worked. Opportunity.
Yeah.
So then we need a setting. So that's going to be the environment or context that's going to enrich the story. Now, don't go too ham on this. Don't be like, it was a beautiful blustery day in the 100-acre woods. We don't have to get that intense about it, but a little, I had spilled my coffee all over myself. Just, you know what? I'll give you that one on the house. Just make it that you spilled your coffee all over yourself. That's enough. That's enough setting. No,
do you know, I agree with you that it shouldn't go too romantic, right?
Yeah.
Don't be too ham. Yeah. But I do believe that it is very powerful to put it into a place and put it into a time. Most of the stories I sell in a sales setting will have phrases like, "Do you know, George, I'm reminded perhaps 3 or 4 years ago, I was in this place talking to this person," and I'll use names, and I will locate it on the globe, and I'll locate it in time. That adds, it's 2 or 3 extra lines that adds real texture and real impact to the story. So placing it on the world, placing it in time, placing it with a human, a real human who's got a name, that adds an extraordinary amount of impact to your sales stories.
Yep. So then we need a plot. So talk about the sequence of events that leads to the resolution of the conflict. So in sales, oftentimes this is the journey from identifying a problem to finding the solution. So what happened? How did we get out of the crisis? Right. And then we need a moral or a lesson. And I love it when I have the prospect or buyer tell me what the lesson or moral is.
Oh yeah. That's, again, they'll believe what they tell you, not what you tell them. 100%.
Right. So, George, why on earth do you think I'm telling you this story?
There it is. Kaboom.
Because if I tell you, then that's why she told me this story. But if they tell me, now they're the hero. They're the hero of story time. Story time hero.
And you know what, when that happens, when they get it right, you get a moment to be like, wow. You nailed that. That's better than I could have said it. Nice stroke. Do you know, I'm reminded there was a study done in the London School of Economics, and they presented a group of people with some data. And then they presented a group of people with the same data, but presented in a story. And then they studied retention. And the data, when it was presented as pure data, the retention rate was, I believe, 10% or 5%, and I don't know how do you measure that? I don't know. Maybe there was I don't know how they measure the level of retention.
That's a head scratcher.
Maybe
but anyways,
questions. But when they presented it as a story, that retention rate went up to 65 to 70% from memory. Look it up. It's a London School of Economics study. So you move from 10% to 70%. That's a massive increase in retention. And then they also studied, do they believe the data? And there was a far greater belief effect when it was set in a story versus set just delivered as sort of cold data. But I don't recall the numbers, the numerical quantity, but there was a significant belief effect too. This is powerful, guys. I mean, you only learn the superpowers with unscripted selling with Sophia and Carlos. You only learn the superpowers. So what do you think? How do you fit these stories in? Where do you fit them in, Sophia?
So I've brought a couple scenarios, 4 actually. No, 3. One of them is kind of funny, is the negotiation story. I can't remember if I learned this one from you or Antonio. It's where, let's say you're in the middle of a negotiation and you ask your prospect, all right, George, let's say it's a monthly investment. George, what is a monthly investment in the team that's not going to keep you up at night. Okay. And let's say it's less than what you have proposed. Well, here's a story I like to tell. Okay. George, I was speaking to a successful, forward-thinking leader like you a month ago, and we came up with a program we came up with a program together for his team, just like we've done today. And he told me that if I could sharpen my pencil just a little bit, just like this, that he was definitely going to move forward. And so what happened was that I went to bat. I went to bat for him. Came back to my leader, and my leader was not happy with the request. Let me tell you, George, she was not happy with the request. But I arm wrestled with my leader a little bit, and eventually I got him to agree to the sharpening of the pencil. When I went back to this buyer, George, turns out that he wasn't planning to move forward anyways. It wasn't a good, the timing for the implementation was off. And George, the sad part about the story wasn't that I lost the deal. It wasn't that I lost the deal. It's that I lost the respect of my leader. Now, I'm willing to go to bat for you, George. I'm willing to arm wrestle my leader again. But is that what's going to happen? Am I going to come back next Tuesday and you're going to have decided that you never really wanted to move forward anyways? So that's an example of one story I might tell. I'd love to hear one of your examples.
Well, on exact, and again, we kind of get a pass here, but I will offer in exactly the same circumstances you're facing there, as you're illustrating there. When somebody says to me, "Hey, Carlos, I know the program's valuable, but we've only really budgeted this amount, and I need you to deliver it for this amount," and I might say at that point, George, first of all, I believe in offering options rather than offering discounts. So, I think the first thing we should do is really get creative with the program and see how we can create an impact with a reduced scope of work. And often, that's not what the buyer wants, especially if he's a D style. He's looking for a win. That doesn't get him a win. He wants a win. She wants a win. And so I have to kind of blow that up beforehand so as I'm delivering I believe in options, not discounts. We should get creative. And then I'm going to say, you know what, George, this reminds me. I have a client, David. By the way, the best stories are true. And David, if you listen, you know who you are. I had a story, I have a client, David. Thing about David, he always needs a win. He needs a win. It's not about the money, it's about the game. And David had that beast inside him that needed to arm wrestle with me. Here's the hard part of it. He's taking away my ability to help his team because he's creating me. If I'd have let David, I'd have become a fraud. And then, 5 days later, 2 weeks later, I'm in front of David's team trying to give them the strength to resist discounts. And if I'd have let David, he would have hamstrung. I'd have let David hamstring my ability to help his team. So I had to manage that in David. Does that make sense, George? Do you see how in doing what I do, we have to be very careful not to frustrate the program before it's even born. So I'm going to tell that story early in my process because I need that bomb to be blown up. And I'll talk about David, and David is a real person. And I will talk about David and about how David has this desire, this need to win the game of negotiation. It's a powerful story to tell at the right time.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if I tell that story when we're negotiating price, I'm in trouble because I've got way too much bias in that story. But if I tell that story early in a low stakes environment, when a bias hasn't appeared yet, well, then that really does help me get the buyer to believe the last thing he needs to do is ask me for a discount, because it's going to end badly. You know, it's interesting as well. I have a client, Paul, and his team. Hey, Paul. You know, I remember Paul once said to me, they're a roofing company. And Paul once said to me, the last person you want to ask for a discount is your roofer. This is the guy who's in control of what materials get used on the roof of your house. That's not the guy you ask.
Sounds like a nightmare to go.
And it's and what a cool, even though it's not really a story, that same message can be delivered as a story. Right.
We have so many, Carlos. We could be here. I mean, I have like a Post-it full of them that we could tell.
So let's bring this home. What have we learned today? We've learned today, I'm going to bring this home. We've learned today that selling is a superpower. We've learned today that about the stretching these muscles, you know, but building these muscles of storytelling can be so valuable to a great salesperson. Elite salespeople are great storytellers, and helping a prospect tell you the story or tell themselves the story is the real magic. We talked about how it helps with retention. We've talked about how it helps with belief. We've even given the guidance that the stories should have an element of crisis. They should have a hero in them, which is the buyer, and not to fall into the trap of making salesperson or product the hero. We've given guidance that if we can locate the story in a place, in a time, it's powerful. And guys, you got to build some. You got to build some great stories. Build some stories. Give them an element of crisis. Make the buyer the hero. I don't know, Sophia, bring it home for us.
All right, everyone. Well, I think we're going to have to do another episode on storytelling, Carlos. What do you think? Should
we just do the stories we tell? Because we've got a mountain of stories.
Mountains. So next episode will be about Q4, finishing the year strong. And then after that, perhaps we do another storytelling episode.
If you want to hear some of Carlos and Sophia's stories, or some of our clients' stories that are really powerful, then put a message in the YouTube or the podcast, or send us an email. But definitely subscribe, like this content. We work real hard for you, and subscribe to our newsletter. And don't forget the AI event that's coming up. Call us for that recording. Hey, but for now, closers, it's goodbye from Sophia.
And ta-ta for now from Carlos. Thanks for listening.
See you guys.